Hello. Before we get down to cinema, I would like to draw your attention to our Patreon. Regular listeners will know that these podcasts are supported by Quad, our home cinema in Derby, UK. But as Quad is a charity, we want to make Cinelit as self-sustainable as possible. So, to that end, we have set up a two-tier way in which you can support Cinelit. For our 35mm Cine fans, you'll get a bonus additional episode each month where we will be deep diving into an area of cinema that will be exclusive to Patreon subscribers for at least 6 months before it arrives like a late dinner guest on the regular feed. Plus, you get the episodes a week in advance of the main feed release. But if you want to support us and don't feel that pressing need to have the additional podcast each month, but still want that warm, satisfying feeling of being part of the Cinelit success story, then you can become an 8mm Cine fan, where you can donate and get our heartfelt thanks. Head over to the Patreon page and subscribe if you can. However, we know that times are hard at the moment, so please do not feel you need to subscribe if you are not able. We'll still be putting out new, free-to-listen-to episodes on a regular basis throughout the year. Now let's get back to your regular scheduled broadcast. Welcome to Cinelit. My name is Adam Marsh, and thank you for joining us again for part 2 of our look at the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Let's dive right back into where we were when we finished, and when we finished, we had Daryl in the boot of a car. Let's see if he gets out. So this was a bit, obviously well received by critics, considered one of the best of the franchise. Big hit, grossed nearly 50 million in America on a $4 million budget. Again, a massive hit, but also well received and ready to prime onto the next movie, which would be for a long time the most successful Nightmare film at the box office. Nightmare on Elm Street 4.
Talking of well received, Nightmare Part 4, The Dream Master, has a major figure in its corner. Alejandro Jodorowsky was promoting Santa Sangre around the time of this film's release, and he was telling everybody that he could, there's this amazing surrealist masterpiece in the cinemas at the moment, and Nightmare on Elm Street, The Dream Master, you must go and see it. So again, you were talking about the art house qualities of the first movie. This is arguably extending across the sequels, and by the time we've got to Part 4, you've got Alejandro Jodorowsky championing it. And whatever anyone else says about this movie, if Jodorowsky likes it, I'm there, And I agree with him. I think that he's right about this. But I know that you're not as big a fan of this one, Adam.
I'm not. No, I don't think it's a very good movie, but I think also just going on to what you're saying about the sort of like avant-garde elements of Nightmare on Elm Street, I think by this point in that late 1988, mid 1988, the idea of doing this kind of a movie, we're already 4 films deep in this franchise. It's already become normal. It's not strange, it's not weird, it's not avant-garde anymore because it has been normalized in the same way as you watch pop videos and things like that in the 80s. Some of those early pop videos are just odd, avant-garde, weird films, and then they're still avant-garde by the late 80s, but that's the norm. Exactly, that's the norm, that's the style. Yeah. So whilst I get Alejandro Jodorowsky saying, yes, this is an avant-garde masterpiece, he hasn't watched the other 3. You know what I mean? He's not gone on that journey. He's been in a cave for like 15 years. He's missed out on all this. He's just suddenly popped up in 88 gone, what is this movie? This is avant-garde craziness. It's like, yeah, you weren't there for the first 3, mate. So on one hand, I agree. On the other hand, I think by this point, it's it's expected to be this kind of a movie. And this one just feels like it goes through the motions. Fairly straightforward. I can't really remember any of the kills in this movie in the same way as I can for the others, and I've watched it a dozen times.
Okay, ones. The one is what the one about 4 or 5. 4 and 5 always seem like kind of their own like a complete thing in a way. I think the waterbed's 4. That's a good kill.
Yeah.
Yeah, the waterbed is in part 4. That's good, and the giant cockroach, the bit of Kafka coming into it, is in part 4 as well.
To be fair, some of the effects work in 4 and 5 is really good, especially like the finale of part 4 where all the hands are coming out and everything. And it was it Screaming Mad George who did the effects on this?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, he didn't. Screaming Mad George tended not to get full gigs because Steve Johnson was the sort of main guy who was married to Linnea Quigley,
right?
Which is why Linnea gets a credit on this, because she plays one of the souls bursting out of Freddie's chest, and I think you can tell which one. So Steve Johnson had the major gig, and but Screaming Mad George often got a sign because he was known in the business as a real extreme effects guy. He quite often got little gigs on shows, rather than being given the full movie. They'd say, "Oh, there's this really weird sequence on page 75 of the script. That's one for George," And so yeah, he'd be given these absolutely outrageous scenes to do that even his stuff even manages to stand out from the 80s effects pack, because he just goes that step or two a little further. But,
the finale definitely feels. I don't know if it is him, but it definitely feels like him. If you watch films like Society, it definitely feels like.
Oh yeah.
But yes, some effects work, and this is pretty decent.
Yeah, there's a few big names behind the scenes on this one again. We've got Rachel Talalay is involved for the first time, who would go on to direct part 6, was it? And she's now involved in things like Doctor Who, in recent years. I think she was a sort of assistant producer or something on this, and starting to make her first steps in the business.
Yeah, she works on all 4 of the first films, in various, in small roles, working her way up to directing, finally getting a chance to direct a fucking piece of shit Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh yeah,
movie.
it's terrible. It's terrible.
Sorry to swear on that.
But on this one, she gets a big prominent credit, which isn't bad for a woman in the 80s, And I mean, we've got Gail Ann Hurd, who produced Bad Dreams. In fact, the film I mentioned earlier. Gail Ann Hurd was making waves in the business, and one or two others. But of course, even today, the business isn't great for women. So for someone to sort of surge through in the way that Rachel did is great, and these franchises, things like the Nightmare series, are good for that. They're good for sort of equal opportunities and allowing actors from different backgrounds and men and women and who are sort of working behind the scenes to get a chance to do stuff. We've also got one of the writers on this, I noticed, was William Copswinkle, and I only know his name from the fact that he wrote the novelization of E.T.
Okay.
And then here he is 5 years later on Nightmare 4.
Yeah, so, I kind of think you're overlooking one of the other writers on this film as being a more higher profile guy, Brian Helgeland, who wrote the screenplay for LA Confidential, the Oscar-winning screenplay for. Yeah,
But he didn't write a novelization of a Spielberg movie, though.
No, you're
right. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, Adam. The other name that I like in the credits isn't a big name, although she's quite big in this film. They bring back the character of Kristen, Patricia Arquette, but they don't bring back Patricia. I'm not sure either she was working on another movie or she may have been pregnant, I think, and not able to work. But they bring in this actor called Tuesday Knight, which always makes me think of Dick Miller's character in Joe Dante's Hollywood Boulevard. Dick Miller plays an agent, and at one point he renames one of his clients January Wednesday. And I always think of January Wednesday when I see the name Tuesday Knight on the credits of this one. But and again, I'm not sure that Tuesday went on to much else after this. But she does a good job of standing in as Kristen. And again, audiences did buy this. I think there was enough distance between the films, and Patricia Arquette wasn't Patricia Arquette when she appeared in Nightmare 3. She was just another sort of sort of up and coming starlet. So audiences hadn't sort of invested in the idea of, oh, this is Patricia Arquette's character. We didn't seem to mind that somebody else had taken over the role, and she's okay. She's all right. You know, you buy her as the same character.
I think what helps is that she's killed off fairly early on in the movie.
Yeah,
it's not. She's not the central character. I think that helps.
And again, the fact that she is killed off isn't a big deal. You know, it's not like Heather Langenkamp being killed off. You know, it's all right. We like that character in part 3, but you do sort of expect that they're going to die early on in the next one. You know, that's sort of the rules of a franchise, is that your star character gets bumped off pretty quickly.
Apart from the Scream franchise, which
we've not mentioned the director of this yet either, Rennie Harlin, who in the wake of this became, for a while, a major A-lister, you know, and certainly in terms of action movies. Every big action film that came out seemed to be offered to him first, and he said yes to a lot of them. And that was all on the back of this, really.
Yeah, he'd done one other film before this, hadn't he? Like
he'd done
Prison, that's right, yeah, which got him this gig.
Which was a hit for Charles Band.
Yeah, it got him this gig, and then obviously he went on to do Die Hard 2, which was a big hit for him.
And then he could sort of name his own ticket after that. He did Cliffhanger, The Long Kiss Goodnight, and then did Cutthroat Island, and barely worked together.
But I think that's what I don't like about this movie, is it doesn't feel like it's directed by a guy who understands horror. It feels like it's an action director directing set pieces, and he's approaching them like an action set piece rather than a horror set piece. There's not much atmosphere for me.
Yeah. I think also, I mean, they come up with this concept of the Dream Master this time, and I two things about that. One, I can never quite figure out who the Dream Master or what the Dream Master is supposed to be. I don't know if you guys are any clearer on that. And two, it's all a little bit Harry Potter, you know. It doesn't really fit part 4 of a slasher horror franchise.
Well, no, it's one of those things where by this point Freddy's in some ways the hero. People are coming out to see Freddy, and then and maybe that went into the idea of making it less horror-y. I don't know.
Yeah, you just want the set pieces at this point. Then you've got a bit of teen drama and fluff in between. You've got some characters who are strong enough to carry it, but you're not overly attached to. So not to downplay, because I don't mind. 4 and 5, I think, not necessarily underrated, but they're kind of forgotten about sequels.
Yeah, I mean, with 4 being such a big hit, it was a huge hit, you know, compared to.
Yeah, see, I was surprised by that, because obviously I didn't see these when they came out, so I always think of 4 and 5 are the ones that kind of people almost forget about. Kind of people don't like 6, 1 to 3 and 7 are quite well received. 4 and 5 are sort of the middle ones. So
yeah, but they were big at the time. All of the Nightmare films were sizable at the box office, whereas the Friday films sort of dipped a little bit, and as I say, didn't all get cinema release. And but the numbers stayed high for Nightmare, and I think we may not like it, but I think the broadening out of the series and the emphasizing fantasy aspects rather than horror and things like that did seem to work. You know, it did help to maintain the audience and even expand it. There were people jumping on board at part 3 and part 4.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I liked about 5 more than. That's why I prefer 5 to 4. I think the idea that these movies are no longer. They're no longer movies. They're more like a series of set pieces. They are pop videos with an interlinking narrative of Freddy killing people.
Yeah, and a great opportunity for makeup men to show their stuff. As we've said, you know, you were getting one guy who was sort of overall in charge of the makeup effects, but he'd have a team of 8 or 9 people working under him, and they'd all go off and do their own little set piece. So everyone would get like 10 minutes of the movie. You know, you see this in the end credits, where you get somebody like Steve Johnson as the sort of puppet master, you know, and then you've got all these other sort of budding talents who are given a chance to have a go. Oh yeah, you've got to turn someone into a giant cockroach, do it, you know, and then they stitch everything together and you've got a Nightmare sequel.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that really shows in part 5.
Yeah, part 5 definitely feels like there's much more style to the way it's filmed. I don't know whether it's just Stephen Hopkins being a more sympathetic director in 5 than Renny Harlin, just filming everything the same.
Yeah, another director who went on to massive acclaim and success later on, became a big Hollywood name for 5 minutes, like Renny Harlin did, and nobody remembers who either of them are now. But both huge for a few years.
Yeah.
There are some great visuals in 5 though, in regards to being a more interestingly shot film. I mean, you've got the whole MC Escher thing towards the end with the staircase is really good.
You got the comic book sequence as well.
Or something. It almost looks like the music video of the Aha one, where he goes in and then Fred is like he's Super Freddy, and that's a great kill.
Yeah, you have distinctive set pieces in this one that I think.
Yeah.
So that set for me elevates it above part 4. But I guess appetite was just waning for it by this point. We got released a year after part 4, and maybe it was just audiences who were a bit like, I'm a bit done with that now.
Yeah, and it harks back to the lore of the series as well, because in part 3 there's this tantalising mention. There's this sort of spectral nun character who keeps appearing to Craig Wasson, and I think would have been better left us not really finding out too much about them. But and there is this mention that Freddy's the bastard son of 100 maniacs, and then they go and show all of that here, and we get Freddy's origin or his sort of conception sequence, and it all gets a bit. We covered the Hammer Frankenstein films last year, and this seems almost identical to scenes in Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell from 1972. You've got all these sort of dueling psychos in sort of hospital gowns, sort of wandering around, stumbling and bumping into each other, and then this young nun gets trapped in with them, and the result is Freddy Krueger. So, but I don't think we need to see all of that, and I think that's best left. It was covered in part 3. Craig Wasson was told all about it by the ghostly nun, and then they show it. It would have been better left as a sort of subtle element of part 3 rather than becoming a big set piece in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, we get to the point where you're running on empty a little bit. We've made this movie about Alex's story, and we've had the Dream Master. Now we've got the Freddy killing through the unborn child in this movie. It's just like you do feel like you're running on empty on the central concept of what a nightmare film is. We've kind of explored everything in this movie by this movie's release. And audiences felt that way as well. I think it significantly dipped box office wise on the others.
And when you're at that point, there's really only one way to go, and that's 3D.
Well, not quite. Not quite. There's one step before that. There's going to TV.
Well, yes.
So exactly, we had Freddy's Nightmares debut the same year in that October. We had the launch of that, which is basically a forgettable horror anthology show. But it does have an interesting first episode, directed by Tobe Hooper.
Tobe Hooper was he was sort of the go-to guy for pilot shows. He was doing everything for a few years. If you had a new sort of science fiction or horror TV show, his name's often on the credits of the pilot.
Yeah.
And here he was. So another massive horror name getting involved in the Freddy franchise.
Yeah. So like Freddy in this series doesn't really appear. He is like a crypt keeper kind of character. Apart from the first episode by Tobe Hooper, where it does follow the origins of Freddy Krueger, how before he died, how he was killed by the parents of the Elm Street kids. Again, is this another example of we didn't really need to see this?
I guess so. Although I'd rather see this than seeing the nun in the asylum. I'd like that to just remain a spooky story sort of thing. And leave the birth of Freddy as a bit of a mystery. but yeah, I don't mind seeing Freddie's backstory dramatised like this, because England's a good enough actor to do that. I'm glad he gets a chance to do stuff out of makeup, and that we get to see a little bit of what Freddie was like as a person.
What do you reckon? Have you seen this one, Adam? Have you seen No More Mr. Nice Guy?
I've seen the first episode because that was included on like one of the DVDs. I don't think I've ever seen any of the rest of the series. I got to be honest.
Yeah, they're a mixed bag, but
I don't think there's a tasteful way you could have done Freddy's backstory as a full film.
No,
because it's just him murdering children, and that wouldn't be particularly entertaining. Whereas at least it's a bit more condensed.
Yeah. And it's a good fit for Hooper as well. You can't imagine Toby Hooper directing a Nightmare on Elm Street film, can you? You know, he's not good with that type of fantasy, I don't think, and that type of he's not good with the sort of dream imagery and things like that. But with the sort of harder story of delving into Freddie's background, I think he's the man. He's the guy for the job.
Well, we that was a blip, I guess. But then we have 3 years between 1988 and Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare being released in 1991.
Now, what's the rule about a film in a franchise having the word "final" in the title?
Well, yeah. It's never the final one, but there you go. That's the thing. But equally, on the poster, they make the claim they've saved the best for last.
Yeah, and again, false advertising, guys.
Unbelievably false advertising. Like literally, like I would sue if that was guaranteed. I'd be like, that is a misrepresentation. You've not saved the best for last. You've done a dog turd on the screen.
Yeah, I think we're all delighted to see female directors getting big Hollywood gigs. We're pleased as Nightmare fans to see Rachel Talalay sort of working her way up the ladder and getting the director's gig. But what a disaster! What a disaster!
I programmed this as part of Dead and Breakfast a few years ago, and I in my head I remembered it being bad, but thinking, well, it's got the 3D element, it's got Freddy vision. 3/4 of the way movie, you got 20-minute sequence in 3D, classic, red and blue glasses, 3D. That'll be fun. That'll be fun. We'll have that. Well, everyone puts on the 3D glasses and they're a bit of fun at 3 a.m. I have never seen an audience turn on me so quickly after that screening. They were angry. They were ready for blood after watching that movie. And so was I. It's even worse. It's even worse than I remember that movie.
But again, we've got big names in this one. A lot of dodgy cameos though this time, rather than proper acting roles. The only major name in the proper cast is Yaphet Kotto, I think, who is rubbish. I is one of my favourite actors of that generation. I don't think it's a bad performance. He's just given nothing to do.
Well, it's an awful movie, Darryl. It's an awful movie. Yeah, nobody can shine in this movie.
He just plays one of the guys sitting at his desk in an office telling the kids what to do, and you don't want an actor of that quality doing that, and then the cameos are largely embarrassing. We get Johnny Depp back again, we get Alice Cooper, we get Roseanne Barr and Tom Arnold, for God's sake. I mean, we didn't mention the great cameo earlier on in part 3 of Zsa Zsa Gabor.
Yeah.
That's how to do a cameo in these films, but yeah, this all seems a little bit desperate. And I mean, the title of the film is obviously a bit of a riff on the Curtis Mayfield funk classic, but you could also say that is it playing on the notion, we've got Freddy's Dead in the title. Is that a sort of slight expansion of Freddy's dad, because we get Alice Cooper here playing a sort of surrogate, like stepdad type figure for Freddy, and again, it's I love Alice, but I like seeing him in films, but this is just embarrassing.
He was the first connected link between this and Friday as well, because he did, which Friday the 13th film was he did the song for?
Was it part 8, I think?
And then he played Freddy's dad for that.
So this is the first tentative link between the two, which was to develop later on.
You're stretching.
Yeah, but what about this 3D sequence though? Again, terrible. They do nothing with
It's an awful movie. Yeah, I don't know what else I can say about it. It's just really bad movie, and I don't know whether it's some movies like I can understand what people call 4 and 5 bad movies, because it feels like they're running on empty. They're doing, but they are trying to do the best with what they've got. This one feels like it's badly cast. It feels like it's badly directed. It feels like everything is like bad in this movie, rather than low budget or just running on empty style.
There are 2 tiny little moments in the film that I love, but even they are guilty pleasure. And even then, if someone said to me, "Oh, they're terrible as well," I'd sort of have to agree. And there are 2 little fourth wall breaks by Robert Englund as Freddy. There's one where he's creeping up on someone from behind. He's creeping up on this kid who it's the guy who's hearing. He's just taken away, and he's creeping up behind him. And then he turns to us, he turns directly to camera and puts his finger over his mouth as though to say, shh. And then there's a bit where someone's plummeting out of the sky. Freddy's cut the strings of their parachute. And we think they're going to fall to the ground and splatter on the ground. And what happens instead is that Freddy appears from nowhere and hauls on this bed of nails and just gives a little glance to camera. And I love those moments. I wish Robert Englund had been given more of that sort of stuff to do.
Daryl, stop it. But that's like Wile E. Coyote, though. It's not Freddy.
But you're saying that like it's
not a bad thing for Wile E. Coyote to do it. It's not a bad thing for Jerry in Tom and Jerry characters, but it's a bad thing for Freddy to do it. The tone of this movie is
as I said, accepted. Yeah. I like those little moments, but I'm happy to admit that they're terrible as well.
Let's move on, because whilst this is terrible, we do get another what ended up being, I guess, the final word at the time. We had Freddy versus Jason after that, but the final word on the core franchise films with Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which is a very important film, both in the Friday series and also as a kickstart for the Scream franchise, which would later become a big part of horror cinema.
Before we get on to New Nightmare, Adam raised a point earlier that we're starting to get these little nudges towards Freddy meeting up with Jason, and of course there's another one at the end of Friday the 13th, Part 9, the final Friday, another final movie that was,
and another bloody awful movie. It's the worst one in the franchise. Yeah.
Worse than Nightmare 6, I'd say.
It messes up the Jason Voorhees franchise and character in ways that Nightmare could only have dreamed of, But then it does introduce the notion of Freddy in Jason's world right at the very end. So
yeah.
Have we got any more to say about that before we move on to the big?
I think it is. I mean, it was the concept of crossing over franchises was starting to become a bigger thing in that period. Obviously, we had it with all the Universal films back in the 30s and 40s, but there was I think one of the big ones was Aliens versus Predator. On the comics,
and
became
stuff like the early
90s, it was that became a big thing, and I think the idea of crossing over people suddenly became, well, we can do it actually. Let's do it, and never really quite came off initially, and then we had to wait a good few years before we got Freddy versus Jason. But in between that, we had this Wes Craven's final word on Nightmare,
which is a contender for best of the series. We showed it at Fright Club.
Yes,
it still goes down well with an audience today. Possibly even more so, because I think people are more used to this sort of meta stuff now. And without New Nightmare, there might be no Scream, and there might be a whole lot of films that wouldn't have happened. It's just such a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been filmed better. It had that 90s overlit style movie. It didn't quite. It looked a bit too TV for me. But it's such a strong script all the way through that it just grabs you and draws you back into that world so successfully. Yeah, I mean, the fact that they even went back and did another movie after this is remarkable, really.
Yeah. And here we are. We've talked about Freddy coming into the real world. Here's an entire movie that is all about its real world setting. They go for it with this one. They say, right, we're going to have everybody playing themselves. Wes is going to be in it. We'll get Heather back. We'll get John Saxon back. We'll get Robert Englund playing Robert Englund instead of playing Freddie. And we're going to set this in reality. And what a way to go. How successful it was. Absolutely right. And kicks off with that great opening scene as well, where is it fantasy? Is it real? The special effects glove coming to life and managing to maul someone, and you can sort of explain that away as, oh, it's an electric malfunction, you know, or is it? And the film really plays on that. Then I think the whole mythology of Freddie is given extra layers here. That's the great thing about it. He's been this figure that appears in your dreams. Now suddenly it's all about, it's Wes Craven having a go at bad sequels and saying there's an evil that is responsible for bad movie sequels. And it's such a great concept. It's such an insider thing as well. It's such a Hollywood thing, but I think audiences know what it's all about and they buy it. Audiences at this point know enough about how Hollywood works. And we've all paid £5 to see a terrible film time and time and time again, whether it's got Nightmare or Friday or whatever else in the title. We've seen so many bad movies that we're so pleased to see a film that is about that is having a go at them and is saying, why do sequels have to be bad? You know, and what do we have to do to stop them being bad?
He does draw from elements of those sequels in making this movie. It's not just Wes going, oh, they're all bad, I'm gonna do my own thing. But the idea of a sort of like evil entity that is lording over your dreams and your evil nightmares and is using Freddy as the most current face of evil. That's not that a million miles away from what we were talking about in the Dream Master and Dream Child. So it's not a million miles away. He's not reinventing the wheel with it, but it's just done so well.
Yeah, Wes is in a good position with this film because he can come in and again pretend to be the saviour of the whole franchise, which I think he was with this. Yeah. But he can then cherry pick all the good bits from all the bad movies and feed them into what he's doing.
Yeah, it wasn't a hit though. Didn't revise the franchise in a sense of like we're going to kickstart another 5-6 movies. It was good reviews, but I think that at that point, people had enough of Freddie.
Yeah, and was the cleverness of this 2 years too early as well?
No,
because it hit big with Scream, but
possibly. But I think Scream felt like he was coming in on the ground floor.
Yeah.
Whereas Freddy 7, even rebadging it Wes Craven's New Nightmare, it's Freddy 7 to most people.
Yeah. I mean, we can debate about what the best part 6 in film history is. I think for me it's between Jason Lives and Rocky Balboa. But is there any argument about the best ever part 7 in movies? I don't think this has got a rival.
I'm not sure of other part 7s, but I have to get back to you on that.
Throwing that onto you without you being able to research it, so it's
exactly, a bit but I know it's better than Hellraiser 7, so we know there's that.
Whatever the second best part 7 is, it's going to be way, way, way below this.
Yeah, so we got all this reinvention of thing. It works critically, and maybe legacy-wise, people go back and watch these movies and go, actually, 7 is the one. It's like 1, 3, 7. They're the ones.
Yeah.
You know,
Adam, we picked this for Fright Club. In fact, it was our revival film when we brought.
It was in September. Yes.
Why did you decide to go with this one?
It's a new Fright Club. It's a new Nightmare. It was a clever little tie-in, and it's one we hadn't screened before. And I think it is quite a modern take on an older franchise. Obviously, this was like 94 came out, and at this point, Freddy is somewhat of a product of another era. As much as we love him, but it is something from like a decade before. But I think the tropes in this meta style of horror is quite modern. Obviously, Scream kickstarted, but films since then have done it quite a bit. So I think it's a great middle ground of a modern style of horror filmmaking with an old classic. And on top of everything, taking away any kind of argument about its validity, anything like that, it is just really, really good. it's enjoyable, and it's such a tight screenplay, and everything is. And I just throw it in. I love that sequence where the film catches up with itself, and they go over to Wes's computer, and it's the screenplay, and it just finishes on the line. And that's my favorite bit of the whole film, is just that one little bit. Seems like such an obvious kind of gag, but it's great.
Works.
It's an interesting way. It's interesting one in people's memories. Obviously, it wasn't a big hit, but because there was so little horror films being released into cinemas in the early 90s to mid 90s, prior to Scream kickstarting the slasher thing again in the late 90s. Every single film you saw in the cinema in that period that was a horror film stands out because there was so few of them.
Yeah.
So this one, even though it wasn't that popular relatively, it stands out for people because I saw it in the cinema and it was like, oh my God, there was nothing else. It became the horror film of the year.
Yeah, hard to believe now, but yeah, there was this barren period where horror just wasn't getting released theatrically, and Wes Craven's always been rather fortunate on that score. His films have always tended to get at least some kind of minor release. I can't think of any that went straight to video. Even My Soul to Take, which was terrible, played in some places, even in 3D, I think, in some places.
Did Cursed get a release? I don't think Cursed got a release, did it?
I can't remember. I did. I got a feeling I saw Cursed in the cinema.
Okay.
I think so.
Were you the only one?
Probably. I was for a lot of these films, but so yeah, Wes has always managed to do well in getting his films released where other people couldn't. And if there were one or two that didn't make it, he's got a better track record than pretty much all of his contemporaries.
Yeah, I mean, the Scream franchise helped with that massively. I think he had. Considering he directed films in the 70s that were big hits, he directed the Nightmare film in 1984. That was a big hit. And then he did Scream in the 90s. He kind of like.
Well, as we said on the Scream podcast, he's probably, even though he's not my favourite director of that generation by a long way. I think there are 3 or 4 are better filmmakers, but he's the one who kept kickstarting horror, who kept taking a chance and saying, this is the direction that I see the genre going in. And then everybody did follow. And New Nightmare is one of those films that does that. Even though it may not have been a direct influence, I think it's safe to say that Scream might not have happened without it, or certainly wouldn't have happened with Wes, and wouldn't have quite had the resonance it did, may not have taken off. And so if you're saying without New Nightmare there'd be no Scream, you can see the importance of it, Yeah. And I think even beyond its immediate influence on Scream, I think meta horror has become a thing in the last 25 years anyway, and that all stems back to this film.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we get this movie, and then they throw it out the window. They go, fuck that shit. We're going to move on to the next one.
Yeah, well, and the Scream franchise has then happened, and Wes is busy doing that. So no one's interested in Freddy anymore.
No, but they come back, and we get Freddy versus Jason in 2000.
2003.
2003.
Yeah, although it was being, again, like the original Nightmare, it was being talked about for years and years and years, even before it happened in Friday Part 9. You're going back to the late 80s and people saying, could we see Jason v Freddy? And so probably out about a 15-year period of gestation. And finally we got it. Another big name director, Ronnie Yu.
Yeah, what do you think? What do you think kickstarted this film? Why do you think they ended up making it? Because there must have been a reason why they didn't make it. And obviously it was like, maybe box office potential, it's not going to do well. And it can't have been, I don't know, what made it suddenly attractive from a box office point of view?
I mean, speaking from my perspective, this was the first time, like I said, I was too young to see this in cinemas, but this was the first kind of Freddy film that was actually new when I was old enough to be conscious of these. I was like 12, 13 at the time, and I'd seen the older ones on tape, but this was exciting because it was like, there's a new Freddy film coming out. So I'm guessing people of that age, it's exciting because it's new. It's, the same effect Star Wars had or something like that. It's like, it's been a decade, but Freddy's back. And those kind of slasher films were quite, I don't want to call them, say slasher films were popular at the time, but that modern era of horror had just kicked off, and you were starting to get bigger budget horror films getting cinema releases, I suppose. So all the things, all the elements were right for this to do quite well. And not a great marketing campaign, from what I remember as well. Like the way they used to weigh them in Vegas. They had like Freddy in one corner and Jason was the heavyweight, and they weighed him on the scales and everything, and they did like gimmicky things like that.
Rocky type thing, yeah. I think you're right on that, Adam, because I would have been in my early 40s when this came out. And obviously I went to see it because I'd seen all the Freddy and Jason movies. And I was probably the oldest person in the cinema. I definitely remember feeling that this film isn't for me. This film is for all the people around me. It's not for me. It was like a horror film with these established characters that was aimed at a new audience. I think you've absolutely hit it with that.
Do you think that was just a time though, Daryl? It was just like, well, this is the way we're making movies now, and in the same way as the Friday films developed as they went along, and the same way as the original Nightmare films changed as they went along. This is just an evolution of that.
I think there's more to it than that, Adam. I think it genuinely was pitched at a new audience, and it was designed to sort of almost alienate the old fans in a way, because Freddy and Jason in this film aren't the Freddy and Jason of old. They're not doing the stuff that Freddy and Jason did in their classic movies, or if they are, it's in a watered down, audience friendly way. It's not aimed at the horror fans that were watching Friday the 13th in 1980. It's not that type of movie. It's a crowd pleaser, and I don't think that that's been the case in either franchise previously. I don't think the films have been made to scare and to shock. They've not been made as fun, and this was a sort of fun time at the movies.
I disagree with that. I think the Freddy films from 3 onwards were designed to be fun roller coaster horror rides with Freddy.
In part, maybe, but I think there's always elements of them that you never lose sight of the fact of what Freddy is, and what he represents. And I think that's always that's a consequence of the first movie, but it's always there. It's always been there, and that sort of isn't in this film. It's the idea of the sort of predatory figure who goes after kids, isn't sort of played on so much in this film, because he's now got Jason as a focus. He's now got a new target. He's not going after the kids, and he's not going after the teenagers anymore. He's going up against a worthy opponent, if you like. It is that boxing sort of metaphor again.
Yeah, it is Freddy versus Jason.
And the film is pitched like that. So this was markedly different, I think, even to the later Nightmare sequels.
I guess this was pushed to be like, you pick a side. Your team Freddy or your team Jason. You're going to root for a villain.
Yeah, the ending's rather clever as well, because they do give us a winner and then sort of make it ambiguous as well, which is very, very cleverly done, I think.
You mentioned the director Ronnie Yu previously, and he'd already sort of like kicked a franchise up the arse with Bride of Chucky.
Yeah, and he was big over here. Prior to that, for his 2 Bride with White Hair films, which were massive on the sort of Asian film circuit, which was a big thing in the sort of early to mid 90s. Very, very substantial, and a lot of the quite a few of the films were getting released on video over here. A lot of the Hong Kong stuff, some of them were making it to cinemas, even if it was at sort of special sort of cult shows and things. But the Hong Kong cinema of that period was big news, and Ronnie Yu was a name that was sort of known. He like people like Ringo Lam and Choi Hark. Was starting to make a name. John Woo was the big one, of course, but Ronnie Yu was a sort of known quantity to world cinema audiences, and he got the Chucky gig on the back of his success in Hong Kong, and as you say, just went to town with that. Just made the great Chucky movie. And I think his success with Bride of Chucky led to him getting the Freddy versus Jason, because a lot of directors have been attached to this over the years and had come and gone, and including probably some of the names that we've mentioned already. I bet people like Stephen Hopkins and Rennie Harlin were in the frame at the time.
Well, this movie definitely is. It's Ronnie Yu in action mode more than Ronnie Yu in horror mode for Bride of Chucky. This is an action film. Really.
Yeah, he makes this a Ronnie Yu film, very definitely, which he didn't manage to with the Chucky. He made a really, really good Chucky film with Bride of Chucky. What he's done here is he's made this film his own.
Yeah, I mean, this movie, I remember watching this and thinking that was a great action film.
Yeah.
And whether that's what people wanted at the time, I mean, it's still one of the most successful Jason films and Friday films.
Would you agree that I think the scenes that people remember from this are the Jason and Freddy mano a mano scenes rather than the kids being killed scenes?
That's what people were turning up for, though. They had to have something else to push it along. They needed a narrative to kind of drive things, but you wanted to see Freddy and Jason fight.
So it is as Adam said earlier, it's Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so, and it wasn't a bad film. I don't think.
I really like Freddy versus Jason. It's not the best, but I think it's tons of fun. I think it's fairly well made. It's definitely got that early 2000s gloss, which, not in a bad way, but dates it a little bit. And some of the soundtrack does as well, and kind of some of the cameos. But I really like Freddy versus Jason. I think it's a lot of fun.
It is one of those films that I remember watching it and thinking it's a lot of fun, but it doesn't quite work. And I think having the two villains is I'm a big wrestling fan, and it's having a heel versus a heel. It's a bad guy versus a bad guy. Doesn't quite work. You haven't got, even though they're trying to artificially create this Team Jason, Team Freddy, you don't really root for any of them. You know, because ultimately they're both horrible people who are killing people. So you don't root for either of them, really.
They are, but I think at this point they have, not necessarily as heroes, but almost in a way that they are. People weren't buying kind of merchandise and action figures of Nancy and John Saxon, whatever. People wanted the Freddy glove, and they wanted the machete and the mask and everything. They wanted to be terrible people.
I love the idea of a John Saxon lunchbox or something. You know, I'd love one of those, but I prefer a Freddy one. But
I think they were. You're right, they weren't. But when you're watching a movie, you need that access character. You need the character that you're going to root for against these people. And I don't think any of the teens in this, any of the humans in this movie were memorable enough to take that lead. And then, no matter what, you're going to get overshadowed by Freddy and Jason in a single movie with both of them in the movie. You got no chance. The reported sequel for this was going to be Freddy versus Jason versus Ash from the Evil Dead franchise. Now that I can see working. I can see
identifiable hero at that point.
Yeah, there's a guy you'd be rooting for there. Yeah.
And you don't get the hero in horror movies very often, like in the same way as you do in the Evil Dead franchise, where it's one of the only horror heroes in that respect. And I think that would have worked. And I think it's a little unbalanced at the minute for this one for me. You watch it, you enjoy it, but there's nothing that you think, no, okay. The satisfaction of seeing Jason win or Freddy win was fine, but you wouldn't have really mattered if the other one won.
No, and then they sort of play around with that anyway, so it doesn't matter. At the end, right at the very end, it doesn't matter. So you know, the big question, and then they sort of bottle out of it, although they do it clever. But yeah, at its heart, it is just Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, and with all of the positives and all of the negatives of that. And I'm glad that Frankenstein meets the Wolfman is a movie, and I'm very glad that Freddy versus Jason's a movie. I'm pleased they're out there, you know.
Okay.
But they're not going to be the ones you grab off the shelves, are they?
No, it does lead after that to the reboots. Then I guess the terrible reboot of 2011 period.
Well, this is Michael Bay's Platinum Dunes, who were doing this at the time, weren't they? Bay was just buying up every horror franchise title he could and doing what was supposed to be remakes, but turned into more like they tended to be sort of remakes of bits of the first 3 sequels or something, with a bit tacked on the end. None of them were any good, and he's improved a lot since on going on. Since then we've had things like the Ouija films and the Purge films and so on. And I think doing original stuff, Platinum Dunes have been great, but I've not been keen on any of their sort of. I think it's because I've got so much love and respect for all of the originals that he remade.
I didn't mind the Friday. I didn't mind the Friday remake. I thought the Friday remake.
That's okay. The thing with the Friday remake is you can think of Friday the 13th franchise entries that aren't as good as that.
Yeah.
Maybe Part 9 is not as good as the remake. Part 7's probably not as good.
There's less characterization with that as well. I mean, Jason is a big guy in a hockey mask. Whereas Robert Englund, like we discussed earlier, really carries the Nightmare films. So,
but as I said, Jackie Earle Haley getting the role was good news. I thought at the time. I thought, oh yeah, if they've absolutely got to do this, at least they've had the sense to cast the right guy. And then, as it turned out, if he was disappointing in the part, it's just because he didn't. I think people went into that seeing him being cast and thinking, yeah, that this could work, and then it didn't quite work. He's okay in the film, but people wanted him to be more than that. I think people went in thinking, yeah, they've got Freddie right. They've picked the only other actor in the world that might be able to play this character. They've gone for the right guy, and then it just turned into Platinum Dunes slot, really. So
they cast it quite well. I mean, like in the same way as the original Freddy films, they originally cast quite well, and then the people they were cast went on to become players in Hollywood TV.
Yeah, because we've got Rooney Mara in
we've
this.
Got Rooney Mara is probably the higher profile, but even like Kyle Gollner, who was absolutely exceptional in a film called Dinner in America last year.
Yeah.
He's definitely one to watch, still one to watch. He's been around for a few years now, but he was great in that film. But it's really come on my radar again in that movie. He's worth checking out. But Katie Cassidy's been in like the TV DC universe things. Thomas Dekker went on to do that the Terminator TV show. So it had some people who were names or relatively names or were going to be names. So the casting was quite well done. It just didn't come together very well, did it? It had bits that were interesting about it. I thought there was a bits where I think there was one scene where one of the characters like bangs their head and is drifting in and out of consciousness.
Yeah,
and you have the Freddy being in and out of the real world and the fake. That was a nice sequence. I hadn't seen that done in the other ones previously, where they were fading from reality and fantasy. That was nice, but that's pretty much it. And like I said before, is they out and out made him a paedophile in this movie rather than just a child killer, and that it worked because they made him the bad guy.
And not like well executed. It was just dark in an unpleasant way.
Yeah, it did. It all felt a bit grim, didn't it? And this definitely wasn't a crowd pleaser, to use the phrase that we've been using. So, and I think most tellingly, there was no sequel, no franchise.
No, exactly. Which was the same with a lot of those reboots, wasn't there?
Yeah.
There weren't many that got sequels. I mean, Hills of Eyes, I think that was sequelized.
Yeah.
I quite like the Hills of Eyes remake. I don't know if that's kind of blasphemy, but I thought.
No, I like that one. I like that.
Yeah, but
then I don't think that was one of Bay's, was it?
No, it wasn't. No, it was
which is why it's good. So.
We're primed for another one, surely. Now we've got the stink of recasting Freddy once. We can get to the next one now, where someone can take it on without the fear of fans going, "Oh, you can't cast anyone but Robert Englund." Yeah. Well, we've already done it.
What do we think about the idea of Freddy in the 2020s, though? Is it a theme and an idea that's not going to fly anymore?
I don't know. I mean,
could you do it? Could you even do it? I'm not sure you could without a lot of online protest.
It's be fun. Hey guys, let's say here's Freddy, instead of being a nightmare demon, he's a social media demon. He haunts Twitter. He kills kids via Instagram.
I'd watch that. To be fair,
Yeah. Although, what rather than having Freddy doing that, what they need to do is bring back another Wes Craven character, Horace Pinker from Shocker, which wasn't a great movie, but which I think you could do a really good update of, and have that figure who sort of in 1989 he was sort of appearing in people's televisions and microwaves and things. You know, he'd be perfect for invading your laptop or your phone. You know,
Daryl, stop. Hollywood is listening. We don't want to give them bad ideas. Stop it. Cool. Okay, so that's the end of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Then there's no sign of another reboot, but I'm surprised with the hits of Halloween doing so well last year. The Halloween Kills sequel doing really good business, and the next one coming out this year. Scream's just been a big hit as well. I would be surprised if we don't get some sort of movement on a Nightmare reboots in there.
Never say never.
It just feels like they've gone back to Halloween. It's been a big hit. They've gone back to Scream. It's been a big hit. They've gone back to Candyman. It's been a big hit. I think there's somebody in there going like, well, why don't we do Freddy again? Yeah, the last one was bad, but it was Michael Bay. You know, we'll move on. We can find someone who's more interested in. There must be some young horror director that wants to tackle Freddy. So we might be saying, are you ready for Freddy in 2024? Which is an anniversary year of the first one. So there you go.
It's in the bag.
Yeah. Cool. Right. That's enough. Thank you very much for joining us on this podcast. We will be back again in another couple of weeks. In the meantime, do check out our Facebook page, like us on Facebook, and please do send us an email to our email address, podcast@derbyquad.co.uk, if you've got any ideas for any subject matters you want us to tackle. Take care, and we'll see you soon.